My mom struggled a lot trying to raise me. She was low income, a single parent, divorced, and caretaker to her elderly mother who lived with paranoia schizophrenia. Struggles that eventually led to her alcoholism and drug abuse, that led me down long, dark roads of foster care, group homes, and shelters. Unknowingly to her, I would watch my mom spy on her. I would watch her cry in her bedroom and pray to Jah and ask him to take me away because she couldn't handle everything that was on her plate, including raising me. It was hard for her to be proud of a daughter who was ultimately a transgender Bati boy. Chichi man for dead, they say. There are people in Jamaica who want to kill people like me. But my grandfather, he always saved the day. When my mom wanted to lessen her stress load, she would drop me off at my grandfather's. He lived in South Philly, Wilson Projects to be exact, and I spent several days a week with him. I always looked forward to spending time with my pop-pop. He stood 6'4", but due to bad posture, many people only believed him to be 6'2". He was a joyous man with a wide smile that carried several missing teeth. His voice was raspy and deep, but with me, it was always soft. The whites of his eyes were brown as the liquor that seeped through his pores. But staying with my grandfather was a warm escape from the harsh realities I experienced at home. But I hated his cooking, and he knew it. I think it was all the hot sauce and spice. But going to my grandfather's meant all the pizza I could stand, and burgers and fries. I really, really loved burgers and fries. And on top of all of that, when my grandfather and I would go into places like Checkers and Burger King, he would always give me money, cash, and put it in my hand and allow me to order and pay for our food. And he would stare and smile at me in amusement because at 6 years old, I just knew I was grown. I had money. But things began to change as I grew older. I began to internalize feelings of being unwanted and unloved by my mom. I thought of suicide quite often. And I was always sad and angry at the same damn time. And I remember getting dropped off at my grandfather's house one day. I was about 13 years old. I didn't want to go. I was depressed and I started to feel like a burden to both my mom and my grandfather. And when I arrived, he noticed my demeanor, and in attempts to cheer me up, he offered to take me to Burger King for burgers and fries. I didn't want to go, but he insisted, and I figured that the walk would be nice. I was wrong. It was hot, very, very hot that day. And when we arrived at BK, it was crowded, the line was long, it was lunchtime. I just wanted to get out of there. As we got closer to the cashier, my grandfather, he did what he always does. He dug in his pocket, pulled out some money to give to me to order our food. But I was in my feelings that day, and I refused to take the money. When we got up to the cashier and it was our time to order, I watched my grandfather slowly point to the value meal he wanted on the enlarged menu behind the cashier. Immediately, the cashier gets an attitude, refuses to turn around, and becomes frustrated with my grandfather's slow pace. And for the first time, I was not on my grandfather's side. In my mind, I agreed with the cashier. I wanted to go. My grandfather grew increasingly embarrassed and yanked me out of the restaurant that day without ordering. When I got home, I ended up ordering us a pizza over the phone. My grandfather passed away when I was 15 years old. It was a very emotional time for me. I felt empty and alone. And I remember at the repast, going around sitting on carpet floors, listening to estranged uncles and aunts and cousins and play cousins share stories about my grandfather. My uncle playfully boasted, "Me glad me don't have to pay me brethren bill no more." And my aunt would reply, "What you mean you paid with his own money?" See, my uncle paid my grandfather's bills with my grandfather's own money. Hearing these stories, I came to understand that my grandfather could not read. He was the oldest of 8 siblings. His father was a grower of sugar. And at the age of 9, my grandfather had to quit school to help tend to the sugarcane. When they would go to school, my grandfather and his brothers and sisters were often teased because they were so poor. They would wear shoes and clothes with holes in them. And my grandfather, quitting school, allowed them to buy new shoes and patches. He provided money for them to eat. It was a generational sacrifice, one rooted in oppression, poverty, and lack of access. A sacrifice that wasn't by choice, but one my grandfather was born into. It was something that turned little boys into big men, but that manhood came with a deep shame, and my grandfather was the chosen one, but he was our hero. Hearing this truth took me back to that day in Burger King. I realized my grandfather struggled ordering that day because he could not read. All those years, he gave me that money because he could not understand the menu. I also realized that those smiles of amusement were also smiles of pride. I was a product of his sacrifice. Seeing his grandchild read and count money was important to him and meant the world. He was able to see me live a life that he was not able to live. I was a confirmation that all those years he worked on that plantation was not in vain and was worth it. I was his daily reminder that things do get better. I beat myself up about that day for many years. As a teenager, I became what people call a bookworm. I was captivated by Black writers and poets such as Richard Wright, Maya Angelou, and Mary Baraka. I spent summers at the Free Library in the Parkway, drowning in stories and books. I was always reading and I loved doing so. Eventually, I became a poet and a lyricist. I released 10 albums of conscious hip-hop music independently, and I even performed with celebrities whom I admire, like Black Thought from the legendary Roots Crew, the Flow Assist from neo-soul duo Flowetry, and the late Guru from Gangstar. And in hindsight, I realized that all of that is a manifestation of what it looks like to keep on my grandfather's memory and to continue a legacy of greatness. It is also a daily reminder to myself that things do get better and we gonna be all right.